Thank you very much. Thank you for the sponsors of this very informative forum on a very interesting topic. I think somebody brought up this morning, or in the first panel, that the changes that we see around the Korean Peninsula are really stirring the pot. I would say that actually what we're seeing out of North Korea, what's happening in the United States and what's happening in Seoul is actually put things in a blender. I mean, trying to figure out how we are going to get toward a policy of denuclearization toward for North Korea is a very, very difficult process. I would say that we are also entering, or we have entered, a very important year in this, especially from North Korea and the United States perspective, but also from Seoul's perspective. And I think over the next couple of years, the decisions that are made in Seoul, Washington, and Pyongyang, and Beijing, and Moscow will play an important role, either for the better or for the worse, about what happens on the Korean Peninsula. From the United States perspective, the issue of strategic patience, which was the Obama's North Korea policy, is really kind of fallen in disfavor. It has really showed that it has proven very, come through with very few results. And especially why we see what North Korea has been doing essentially since about, I think the decision in Pyongyang was made somewhere in the summer of last year, where they really moved away from the diplomatic charm campaign that we saw that began in May of 2013 and then came to a crashing halt with the August events and the August crisis along the DMZ last year. I think that North Korea came to the conclusion that trying to work its way out of this problem through diplomatic means of being recognized as a nuclear power was not working. And they have now shifted to go in a very rapid pace toward trying to become developing a viable nuclear strike capability. And we have seen this through the numerous missile and nuclear tests that have taken place in 2016. And I think that North Korea is now headed down that direction. And we just heard from Kim Jong-un yesterday in the party newspaper, Nodong Simyun, saying that basically giving the new U.S. administration warning that North Korea has no intention of backing away from its nuclear program. And so it's kind of laid some stakes in the ground. As far as the new Trump administration that is coming in, it's kind of interesting because I think that for the first time since I've been watching North Korea, which has been probably for now nearly 30 years, it's easier to tell North Korea's position on things than it is the U.S. position. We just don't know what President Trump's policy and strategy toward North Korea will be. I think that he has three options that he could go toward trying to get denuclearization out of North Korea. One of the more provocative strategies is being talked about now in think tanks around the Washington, D.C. area, and it's really born out of frustration of the fact that U.S. strategic patience has paid very few dividends, and that's the whole idea of preemption, military preemption of the North Korean nuclear program. This is being talked about in the press, and as I said, talked about in the think tanks. It's not, in my opinion, probably being talked about widely within the U.S. government circles, but it is something that people are referring to if the current pressure strategy does not work. And obviously, the preemption strategy would have a lot of downsides, and the fact that the potential chaos that it could create in terms of a North Korean retaliation are quite profound. And also how China would react to this is probably something that the United States would not want to mess around with, potentially leading to a war on the peninsula. The second policy and strategy is the continuation of the current strategy that we're on, which is pressures and intensification of those pressures through unilateral sanctions on the part of the United States. Of course, this runs into a lot of problems, again, with China supporting a very strong sanctions policy against North Korea. And if they do not, then the ability for North Korea to continue down the line of its nuclear program probably will happen unabated. And then the third policy strategy is one of engagement. And this is one, though, that within Washington and probably also in Seoul is looked at as probably being the kind of weakest choice at this point. Many people describe it as a Munich approach or pushing back toward appeasement of North Korea. But the way that I think this will play out over the next several months is that President Trump will probably continue with the current line of pressure strategies against North Korea. I suspect that China will not support those, and this will lead to North Korea continuing to make progress on the nuclear program. This will take place, I believe, over the next year or so, seeing more tests and demonstrations of the nuclear program, which will force Washington to have to reassess its policy. And at that point, we will be, I think President Trump, we will see out of Washington whether there is going to be a new strategy. And we haven't been given any clue so far, which was talked about in the first panel, about what direction that may be. My own personal opinion is that we have to have a balanced strategy of pressures and engagement. Because if all you have is pressures on North Korea, you're creating a sense from the North Korean decision-making perspective of two choices. On the one hand, the nuclear program and survival, and on the other hand, regime change or the collapse of the regime. And if that's their only two choices that they're left with, then I think that they probably choose the nuclear program. And why I say this is because I think that there is a fundamental misunderstanding in Seoul and in Washington that North Korea will buckle eventually to pressures being put on it by the outside world. North Korea is committed to this nuclear program, and unless you can change that calculus that North Korea has between the nuclear program and survival of the regime, that North Korea is not going to reassess its policy toward the nuclear program. It is my opinion that if you can readjust that balance in their calculus, you can get North Korea to at least think about something such as a freeze of its nuclear program that then buys time for the various countries to possibly engage and look for a way forward. Whether the new Trump administration would follow along such a policy which would be really out of step with traditional thinking in U.S. Policy toward the Korean Peninsula, it is very hard to say. But again, I think we are presented with a unique opportunity at this time that we haven't seen in a long time, where new administrations are coming into place in the United States in the beginning of the year and in Seoul at the end of the year, for us to really take a hard look to think about the North Korean nuclear program. Because it is my opinion that if we let this continue to go for about another few years, we are going to pass a threshold beyond which there is no return, and we eventually either have to deal with a nuclear North Korea, or we're potentially dealing with a chaos on the peninsula. Thank you.